I'm a survivor and my old friend just sent me a letter. Let me explain it all. My name is Eric. I was only 15 years of age when my whole life changed. 10 years ago my mother and father sent me to a Bible camp where we learn all the basics of the Bible and get saved. I went there mainly due to my friends being there every year, but my best friend was there every year. His name was Billy and we were inseparable. We ate, played, and slept in the same bunk bed. Well, that year he and I were talking when a couple of other kids who were popular asked for us to join them on a camping trip. What do you mean? I said with a confused look on my face. They replied, oh, don't be a baby. There's just this abandoned bus only a mile from camp and it's like a tradition to stay the night in it for one night at the most. Billy looked at me and I looked at him and we nodded. We'll do it. We are not scared. The biggest kid there, who was only a year older than me, said, well, come get you at midnight, so be ready. They all began to separate and Billy and I continued to do things around the camp like fishing and playing games. A few hours passed and it was getting dark. We decided to go to the bunks and pretended to sleep. Just enough for when the camp consolers come by the cabins and checked on us that we all looked asleep. He checked the bunks and like usual, he left without suspecting a thing. Billy and I slowly stood up and did the old pillow trick to make sure the coast is clear, then leaped outside of the window. Billy and I agreed to meet the other kids at the canteen since it never gets patrolled. Once we got there the other kids started to speak to us in a hushed tone. You guys ready? We got to hurry. Billy and I nodded and we all quickly and quietly ran to the woods behind the canteen. After a short distance, our group came across a barbed wire fence. However, the largest kid of the group came with wire cutters. With a few snips, we were past it. While we were walking to the bus in the woods, some of the kids who's done this before started to talk about a legend of how the bus got there. Legend says that the bus was once filled with children and the bus driver drove here to drop kids off at the camp. However, he drove into the woods just before getting to the camp. It was said that then the driver stood up and locked the doors, pulled a large machete out, and began slaughtering the kids. Apparently, only one kid survived, and this kid became mute and never spoke again. We all collectively gasped. I started to physically shake. I was never brave, it was the opposite. I always have done the safe thing and followed my gut, although it did make me soft. However, I have been trying to get better over time and I saw this as a prime opportunity to stop being such a pussy and do something new. I think Billy saw me shaking and he put his hands on my shoulder and asked, hey bro, are you good? You never do well in these situations. Billy knew me and my idiosyncrasies and he's always been a great friend. He's the only one I've ever trusted in my life. After about 30 minutes of walking, we saw it. A large rusty bus with broken windows and a door that is barely on its hinges. We all froze once we got to the clearing that held the bus. Seems like everyone was waiting to see if we still do this or not. It wasn't long until I stepped forward holding Billy's hand. Doing this inspired the other kids to follow suit and soon enough we were right in front of it. The outside of the bus was rusty and old, but the inside was still rather clean. There wasn't even graffiti on the bus. I mean, the legend was old, like really old. It was dated around when my grandpa was a child. Anyways, the bus on the inside had classic green seats that were rough and old, but somehow still comfy to lie on. My friend and I chose the back two seats to hang out in. The other kids started telling short ghost stories, mainly talking about how spooky the previous camp was. Before it was a church camp, that is. I heard before the incident that kids kept disappearing in the area every day and no one knows where they went. One kid said, I heard the bus driver was giant and mean. My dad told me that his dad told him that the bus driver was getting fired and went on the rampage once he found out. One kid said, I heard he wore a pig mask and ate some of the kids and the cops never found him ever again. My brother says he still walks these woods today looking for kids to eat. Everyone gasped in fear and shock. I kept quiet and started to shiver with every gruesome story that was told. One kid said a couple of years ago a group of kids just like us came here and all disappeared and no one questioned it, as if the whole town just forgot about it. Billy noticed I was scared and came to my seat to rub my back. I always had a secret crush on Billy, but being a scaredy cat and being B was ground to be bullied the rest of my school life. Hey man, calm down. They are just stories and nothing is out there. Haha. Billy chuckled a little, and so did I. Like how ridiculous would it be if like 10 kids go missing and no one goes looking at all? Billy said before laughing more. I laughed too because at the time it did seem absurd. Billy and I fell asleep within an hour. That night I had a strange dream, not a normal scary dream, but disturbing. It seemed like I was floating in a sea of blood and viscera. The air was warm and thick like a warm humid summer's day. There was a smell of death floating. I gagged but nothing but insects and blood came out. I could feel the texture of the slurry as it came up and out of my nose. Minutes felt like years in this space. I kept floating trying to scream for help while crying, but to no avail. I was alone. At least I thought it was. After a few hours of floating around in silence, I started to hear the sound of the liquid slurry rustling around. It kept moving under the surface until it looked like a torrent of blood and teeth. Within a moment the slurry came still and a tall figure rose from the blood. A tall, pale humanoid shape stood on the thick crimson liquid staring at me and smiling. It had no eyes, but I can feel as if it was peeling away at my soul, reading me, consuming me, not consuming my story. I kept screaming and screaming, and only one thing came to mind. One name. The Void. It spoke to me when it seemed it had its fill. Ha ha ha. Your story is sweet and soft like a ripe fruit. I had a great meal though. Go spread my word and have everyone know who I am. I'm the end. I'm the great dying. I am the Void. Beware, child. God has abandoned you, abandoned us. For I have walked the halls of heaven, and I have seen the throne of God and it was empty. It was then I was dragged into the crimson liquid. I couldn't breathe, and I kept going deeper and deeper. More and more blood and fluids filled my lungs, and I could feel my heart pounding. I felt like I was dying. I thought to myself, is this what dying feels like? Am I going to drown? And when I reached the bottom of the sea I was sprung awake. It was Billy. He woke me, and he looked nervous. Eric. I saw something. Someone in a pig mask walking around the bus. My ears started to ring, and my heart sank. With that one of the kids started to scream as they saw someone walk onto the bus carrying the wire cutters and laughing. I started to cry, and admittedly I pissed myself. Billy stood in front of me as I cried, to protect me. It will all be okay, he said looking back with a smile on his face. All the other kids started to laugh. It was then one of them said, look, Eric peed himself. My face grew hot out of embarrassment. The biggest kid took his mask off and laughed at me, pointing at me and making crying noises to mock me. Billy grew angry and swung at the kid, knocking him down, which angered the big kid's friends who were about to gang up on him when suddenly a large man, must have been 7 feet tall, walked on the bus. The whole bus started to scream as he slowly walked forward down the aisle. Each step he took felt like the whole bus shook. He then saw the big kid getting up. What are y'all screaming for? It's just me. Before he could finish what he was saying, the large man in a pig mask swung a hammer down on his head, nearly splitting it in half. The loud crack and squelching of blood made the bus go silent as the largest kid died in front of us. Some kids were jumping over the seats, but it was all a futile effort. All the exits were locked, and he had us cornered. One by one we mangled the other 8 children, eventually coming to a stop at us. Something about Billy looking at him with no fear made the man not strike him down. Instead, the man laughed and laughed. He grabbed Billy and tossed him, then he reached down and grabbed me by the hair. Billy charged him with the wire cutters, digging deep into his waist. I can hear Billy opening and closing the cutters. With each clip, I can hear the large man scream in pain. The man lifted the hammer high over his head and brought it down on Billy's head, caving it in a little, and before he could swing again I leaped into action. I'm not sure why, since I was terrified, but seeing Billy hurt forced my body to move faster than ever before. I ripped the wire cutter out of his belly, causing him to wince in pain. With just enough opening I was able to shove the tool directly into his throat, and I cut his neck. I kept cutting and cutting and cutting until his head hung off his body by a single strand of muscle. I rushed toward Billy, crying and screaming as he was unresponsive. He looked at me wanting to say something. I love you, he let out weakly. You'll make it, man, you will. I started to drag him to the camp, where the consolers were looking all over for us. I know this because I only got halfway through the woods before 3 of them showed up with flashlights. One almost fainted and the other 2 instantly tried providing first aid. I saw Billy leave the camp in an ambulance and the police went to speak to me. Son, what happened back there? I looked at them and said what I saw, all of it. The cop went down on one knee to look me in the eyes. Son, there was no man in that bus. There was only you and Billy. Which one of you did this? I looked in shock as I swore a man came on the bus and killed all the kids. I cut his neck with a pair of wire cutters. I felt his blood squirt all over me. He looked back at the other cop. He sighs and spoke slowly. Son, Billy has a cut on his neck. He's barely alive. Are you telling me that Billy did this? It was then it hit me. Billy was the killer. My mind blocked the idea of that being the case, but Billy protected me by killing the other kids. The cop stood up and told the other police to keep an eye on the kid. I saw Billy in the ambulance laughing as he did on the bus. Come to find out, the town I lived in covered this story up to keep the press from making it an infamous town. Families of the children were paid heavy hush money and I never got over this incident. It took years of therapy to get the sound of the children being butchered out of my head. Many nights went by as I dreamt of the whole event over and over and over, like a never-ending Rolodex. Just a week ago I noticed something. Billy never was put in prison since he was a minor, but he did get put into a psych ward. I got a letter in the mail today from an old friend. It says as follows: Dear Eric, I have had some time to process what happened that night. I never stopped thinking of you and wanted you only to be happy and smile. I'm getting out soon and I will visit. I want to play some of the old games like hiding and seek or tic-tac-toe. Eric, I miss you more than anything in the world. Love, Billy. The scary thing is I moved twice since the incident.